Okay, so let's approve last month's meetings.
Should I do the roll call real quick?
Oh, sure.
Is that okay?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Committee Member Kane?
Here.
Committee Member Charles?
Here.
Committee Member Goldman?
Here.
Committee Member Sala?
Here.
And Committee Member Baker and Chasty and Chair Montauk are not present.
Okay, so anybody want to make a motion for last month's minutes? Anybody want a motion? Can I make my own motions if I'm leading the meeting? Okay, I move to accept last month's meetings.
I'll
minutes.
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Minutes are approved. Public comment. Anybody from, any of you, either of you guys want to comment? No? Okay. Announcements.
I'm sorry. I'm going to take a shot at these. I haven't been personally involved in all these, so I'll do my best from what I've gathered from others. First, with respect to Target, the Planning and Zoning Commission approved the demolition of their vacant garden center, and they're going to build some parking closer to the store around the area where the garden center was, and then subdivide the parking lot that's to the north on the other side of the creek, kind of behind the Toyota service center. So there'll be a 1.1 acre parcel back there, which they will sell off, hopefully to a interesting retailer to help kind of build activity out there. So there's some technical stuff that they have to do with us to complete the subdivision of the parcel itself, and then obviously there's a little bit of construction work with the parking lot and the demolition work, but the policy decision, the policy approval has been made by the commission.
I have a question. Does the city get to weigh in about who they sell it to, or is it just like the open market, whoever bids the most, or?
A little bit of both. They do have to come back with the proposed user needs to come back for a conditional use permit, but they get to decide who they want to sell the property to. We don't regulate that, and we're in kind of a reactive mode to whoever they propose. We can, and perhaps at another meeting, if you wanted to think about some ideas for that, that we could advance to Target, that would be great.
I think last month, what we were saying, that they were thinking of
Food, right?
fast food? I can't remember the specifics.
That's what I thought I heard.
That's kicked around for years. In-N-Out is really anxious. Yeah, In-N-Out really wants to have a restaurant in this area, so they look at every off-ramp, and I'm not sure that's the best place for them, but that's a possibility.
So they would sell the land, and then would the purchaser lease it to In-N-Out, or In-N-Out, or whoever it was, would they actually be the purchaser, and then they would run their business?
Usually, well, if it's different, every company is different. Some retailers like to own their real estate, others like to lease it. It just depends on the particular business model. So I don't know specifically with In-N-Out. I don't know how they like to operate.
So most likely fast food, or is it there's no way to tell?
No way to tell.
Okay.
No way to tell.
It certainly put Albany on the map.
We still think about what it sounds like we don't get to actually have any decision, we could sort of certainly weigh in, I guess, if we have a certain specific thoughts.
We can be proactive and go to potential businesses that we would like to see there and say, hey, we know that this is coming up and we'd love to see you in our community. Would you consider, talking to Target who's about to sell this land, because we'd love to have you here.
I would love to see maybe a second location for Five Little Monkeys in Albany.
I'm just gonna go, what's the price?
Nice try.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting discussion to have, and you're both public officials, and so you've thought about the big picture, but you're also residents, and what would you like? What would compel you to go out and go shopping there? I think that would be interesting feedback to give them. I'm sure they would appreciate that.
Interesting, okay, thank you.
Next one is Picnic Gourmet. This is a small business that currently sells sausages and chicken, I understand, at Kensington Market, among other places. And they're moving into the Four Corners Cafe. They've signed the lease, and they're going to be doing some relatively simple tenant improvements. They also will have a off-site beer. Am I saying that right? A beer and wine license, so they can sell beer and wine for consumption off-site. So you buy your chicken, your bottle of wine, you're all set.
I think they're also doing like to-go salads and side dishes and stuff, so you can get everything you need for dinner in one spot.
Britt Marie, I believe that has reopened under new ownership. I don't know.
Last night it was kind of the soft opening, right? Saturday. The soft opening for us, I guess.
Same site where they were before?
Same site.
Yeah.
So the guy who
Floors, new everything.
Well,
is it this? It's a different guy than.
It's Timo,
Yeah. Okay.
and it's everything is new.
Wow.
Everything, except for the bar itself.
so Timo's gone from, I think, managing to owning it, being a partial owner now? Yeah, part owner, yeah. Partners, yeah.
On the Economic Development Implementation Plan, I understand that the Planning and Zoning Commission is working through the recommendations on changing the parking waiver process. I'm sorry, I don't have the specifics on this, but I think the general idea is to take the recommendations that were in your plan and implement that into the municipal code. And then last, the encroachment permit for a bus stop parklet on Solano Avenue in front of Mr. Dewey's. That was discussed at the Traffic and Safety Commission last week, and the commission voted 4-0 late at night. So there wasn't a lot of discussion, but they voted 4-0 to make a recommendation to the city council. Not exactly sure when that will be going to city council. It could be in the next month or so. And that would be to for the construction of another one of these bus parklets where the bus will stop in the travel lane, people load and unload quickly, and then there would be a seating area both for bus patrons and for business patrons.
Where's the bus stop there currently?
This is going to be a new bus stop where it's relocating from around the corner.
Oh.
So
Because we're moving the other one to
we're
Max's.
we're moving the bus stop that's presently stopping. It's the northbound bus stopping before the bus gets to San Pablo. That's creating a lot of issues for transit service and traffic congestion in San Pablo. So the people get on and off there. If you're on the 72 just going up and down San Pablo, the bus stop will be on the other side of Solano on the north side. And then this stop would be primarily for the 18 that's heading east towards Berkeley. And actual implementation, assuming the council approves it, actual implementation would be a number of months after that. There's a process apparently that AC Transit has to go through once everything is approved. It has to be constructed, which isn't that complicated, but the AC Transit process for changing a route takes a few months for them.
Any indication on his level of funding so far?
I don't know that. I think he's working on fundraising, and I'm sorry, she's not here this evening. She might have a better idea of that than I do.
Do you know if Flowerland is going to be involved with this one as well? I know they kind of partnered on the other one.
I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that mentioned. There is some planters as part of the design, and if on the Traffic and Safety Commission agenda there were a couple of conceptual images of what it would look like. If I could pull those up if you were interested. No? Sure.
And we have presentation on the overhead utility lines.
Yes.
You again.
Yeah, I'm going to keep on rolling if you don't mind. My understanding is the committee just wanted to get information on the process and issues associated with undergrounding utilities. So I can run through this as maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and of course feel free to interrupt me at any point. It's just kind of, I did a little presentation just to kind of keep myself organized, but I don't mind the questions. First of all, I don't know, probably the graphic really isn't necessary, but this is the idea. Throughout most of Albany, we have overhead utilities that look something like this, and the idea is that they all go underground. We have a project right now on Marin where we're implementing an undergrounding project, and I'll have a little bit more information on that later. Within the commercial districts, most of the utilities are already underground that serve the businesses. In some cases, some of the businesses may be getting their power from a side street or from the rear of the property. There are sometimes utility lines that are or utility poles, I should say, that are behind properties or in the middle of a block. So compared to the residential areas of the city, the commercial areas are pretty good in terms of utility undergrounding. There are situations where utility lines cross the street, and this is an example, obviously on Solano, where it's a high voltage PG&E line that's going north-south. This is by the post office. And then there are a few examples on San Pablo where utility poles, the power lines are run from one light pole to the next. I think this was kind of a trying to think of the right word. I want to say kind of a inexpensive and maybe a little bit lazy way to connect a.
It's a very nice way.
Well, it's not temporary anymore because I think it's been there for decades. But it's a way that they connected two light poles without having to dig a trench. So I think there's one or two examples of this along San Pablo. This is very simple kind of.
It's a shame that we didn't use the opportunity when we recently built this project to take care of that.
Yeah, we talked about that. There was an awareness of it. The city didn't put any money into the construction of the project, and this element of it was not something that we legally had the authority to require the contractor to do. So we ended up having to live with it. When we continue this cycle track north, would be the time to complete that. We'll be moving the other utility pole that this line is connected to, and that would be the time to do that. In terms of the utility poles themselves, often people don't realize this, but they're not city facilities. They're owned by the wooden pole itself is owned by PG&E, and they get to put it wherever they want. And they're governed by the California Public Utilities Commission. The only role we have as a practical matter is that when they do this work, they do come to us for what we call an encroachment permit. And in case of a utility pole, it's basically making sure that their traffic control plan is in place so that they're not disrupting traffic on the street. And we'll often talk about and require them to consider the specifics of a situation. So if they're doing it in the middle of September, we'll tell them there's a Solano stroll coming up. I don't know if that makes any difference to them, but we tell them that. Same goes with schools. If they're doing any work around a school, we say there's bell hours and so forth, and we want them not to be doing any work while the kids are wandering around. So the other utilities that use these poles, AT&T, Comcast, some of the fiber optic companies are doing it, and soon we'll be seeing wireless antennas on the top of some of these. These are all come to us through or subject to an agreement with PG&E. Advantages of undergrounding, I don't know that I really need to go through this in detail, other than it's kind of obviously aesthetically it's a whole lot better. It improves the appearance of the community and the accessibility of walking, particularly our sidewalks, since most of these are placed right in the middle of the sidewalk. And for any of us, it's nice to get out of there, get it out of the sidewalk, but particularly people with visual impairments. It also helps with tree trimming and just less you have to worry about with trimming trees, and for PG&E they have to spend less time maintaining the utility lines. And then finally, the other thing that's obvious these days is the safety aspects of it. People don't crash into the underground utility poles, or even you don't have the collisions with utility poles, and the wind and fire events are less likely, and waste management is less likely to run into one of the low-hanging lines as well.
Those hot days.
Yes. So the real challenge with underground utilities is money. All of us as PG&E ratepayers have a slice of our monthly bill goes into a particular fund. It's called Rule 20A, and PG&E is supposed to hold that fund and make that available to the city for undergrounding utility projects. They're holding roughly, as I understand it, about $70,000 per year for us to do these kinds of projects, which is, as you'll see in a second, hardly anything. And in recent years, they're not even spending what they're collecting, or they're very slow to work with cities to spend what they have, which is just frustrating. So costs. If you want to get into the gory details of these kinds of things, the city of Berkeley recently did a detailed study, and I'd be happy to provide that to you. In that study, they estimated the project costs at roughly $5 million a mile to underground utilities. Other cities have done estimates in kind of a more tangible sense of understanding what it means to us. They're estimating this $50,000 to $100,000 per resident in a typical street to underground the utilities and disconnect, everything from the beginning to end of disconnecting the old utility, burying the lines, pulling out the pole, connecting to the new utility meter, and connecting all of the utilities, AT&T and Comcast, as well as PG&E. And those costs, of course, as you would expect, vary depending on the complexity of the situation. Piedmont a few years ago had a nightmare project where they were trying to do this, and they ran into a big underground rock. I guess half the city's built on a rock or something, and they had terrible soil conditions and became very expensive. The other thing for using these funds is that there are criteria that are listed here, and I think the basic idea is it's really supposed to benefit the whole community, not just the people who might live or might have a property right in front of the utility pole. So it's places where we're driving or walking by all the time, near a park, as you can see, near a civic center. I don't know. For better or worse, these are their criteria. I'm not sure that's where, if we were to list the criteria, the same ones we would use, but it is what it is. There are a couple of other programs that are more of a hit on property owners. So if a group of property owners decide they want to pay for it themselves, there's basically two ways of doing it. One is to assess themselves over a period of many years, and you have to do it in a district, and 60% of the people in the district need to agree, and PG&E chips in 20% of the cost. And the other one is, I'm not sure who's going to do this, but you can pay for it all up front. So if you've got $100,000 sitting around and you want to get rid of that utility pole in front of your house, and you get a few neighbors to agree with you, you can just go do it. Through this program, you can't just do it without PG&E, but they will be happy to take your money. I haven't been able to find a city that has done that up front. There are a number of cities, and I think Berkeley may be one of them, where they're doing some of these assessment districts. And then finally, just to connect back, I think this is my last slide, to connect back to the Marin Avenue project, which is our recent example of undergrounding utilities. The impetus for the overall project was to create the bike lane, close the gap in the bike lanes for the last 3 blocks here as you're coming down Marin and approaching San Pablo. In order to make all that fit, and to use this money that had been collecting over the years at PG&E in our name, we expanded the project considerably to do the undergrounding. The total cost, as you can see, almost $4 million to underground those utilities. This was one of those examples of a particularly complicated project. There was, and I'm sorry I don't have a picture of it, but I recall there were lots of lines on those utility poles. There were high voltage lines, lots of trunk lines for communications, and so each of the utilities have spent a lot of time and money. Either we're managing it, or in some cases the utilities themselves are spending the money directly in managing their own elements of the project. So while we may create the trench, the utility company comes in and actually does their own wiring in a lot of cases. And part of this also included trenching to each individual home and connecting that home to the new underground utility line, and if there are landscaping impacts, addressing those landscaping impacts. And if you move the rose bush, you have to deal, it's a very high touch project that you have to deal with individual situations. If you're cutting up somebody's driveway, you got to put it back. So the cost adds up pretty quickly. So I think that is, that's what I had to share with you on this. Maybe. Yeah, I'll try. There was, let me make sure I get this right. There was a city council proposal or request to explore the feasibility of adding, first to add a city fiber optic line. We're not sure what it would have done, but it was just in anticipation that this is the wave of the future. And the consequence of that would have been that PG&E would have reduced, they would have forced us to absorb a greater share of the cost of the project. As it is now, when we're trenching a utility trench, the three utility companies are sharing that cost because they're the only ones in there. If we were adding our own line, we would be absorbing a quarter of the cost of that utility trench. So it would have significantly increased project costs. With respect to Sonic, my understanding is they were offered an opportunity to do it and they elected not to. I think from their perspective, it's cheaper to, well, it is definitely cheaper to run an above ground wire on a pole than it is to share in the cost of undergrounding. So it wasn't anything that the city said, oh no, we don't want you in there. I'll make sure, I'm going to double check the complete history on that, and I'll email you all if I'm off base on that. Mark Hurley, our Public Works Director, was more directly involved in that issue. Yeah, questions do come up, and it feels like it's a missed opportunity, but it also was, we were trying to manage a project that was, it actually came in much higher than we ever expected. The construction costs came in much higher than we initially expected, and we didn't have any other money budgeted to be able to absorb the share of the trenching cost.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'd be happy to answer
Questions?
any other questions.
Comment? Can I make a comment?
Sure.
Oh, something about undergrounding utilities as well. So poles after an earthquake have a tendency to fall over, and they're one of the biggest problems for emergency response. In fact, there are places in the Berkeley Hills that if there were a down pole, it would completely block egress from certain neighborhoods or micro districts in the hills. And so that's kind of why Berkeley started looking into it. It's a safety issue. It's not just an aesthetic.
That makes sense.
Both earthquake and windstorms. And maybe the pole doesn't go down, but the line goes down,
Right.
and it stops traffic.
Now, are there any concerns about them being underground when there's an earthquake area or a fault line within a certain, how does that work? Not at all.
To my knowledge, it's much less likely to be damaged. And if it is damaged, it's easier to fix. You don't have to get somebody in a boom up to the top of a pole in the middle of the night.
Cool.
But I'm not one of those guys, so I couldn't tell you the details.
Okay.
Thank you.
So now we have, anybody want to request future agenda items?
Stephanie's thinking.
I'm thinking.
She's thinking mandatory attendance something.
I already voiced those concerns.
Just saying.
I don't know. What happened to Lime Bike? Seems like they were everywhere and then nowhere. Do we still have it in our city? Sorry to go on a tangent.
The number of bikes is completely their business decision. So they came in at the beginning with kind of a surge. I think it was more of a marketing visibility thing where they tried to put a lot of bikes out, and my guess is they weren't getting a lot of takers in Albany, and I'm personally not surprised by that. Those bikes are pretty clunky, and most people who bike in Albany have a bike. So I wasn't, like I said, I wasn't terribly surprised that it wasn't a big, something that was really going to take off in Albany. But the scooters are starting to show up, and those seem to be a little bit more popular with, and maybe have a little bit longer, more likely to be popular. The other thing in terms of the kind of the mobility, changing mobility world, the gig car, the car share,
Ask you about that.
that is taking off pretty substantially, and it's growing like 5 or 10% a month in terms of membership and the number of rides or number of trips that people are using in or out of Albany. And I think it's a lot of people in UC Village really like it, and there's starting to be some people in neighborhoods that are instead of that second or third car, they use the gig car. There was an interesting situation a few weeks ago up on, I think it was Gateview, where someone called us and complained that there were a bunch of gig cars and what's going on. We have to do something about it. And it turns out there were a couple of people who live there who use it on a regular basis, and it was in lieu of having their own car parked on the street that they wouldn't use very often. They have the gig car parked there. And gig they're interested in putting their cars where people are going to use it, and if they don't use the car every day, they're not making money. So if it sits for more than a day or so, they move them around. They have a staff that picks them up and drives them down to wherever they see demand. So that's exciting. That's good I think for all of us, that we don't have extra barely used cars sitting around.
It's a AAA program.
Yeah.
Big Brother's AAA.
Yeah, it's legit. It's
super legit.
yeah. Some of the bike share things are kind of techie startups where they get a lot of money and not so sure about the business plan. But yeah, I think gig has it. They're in it to make some money.
Strong skeleton.
Okay,
I think the long-term planning committee would love to see about getting some marketing materials created. Maybe we could add that to the future agenda items to discuss what that would look like. Fellow subcommittee member.
I concur.
Yeah. Just checking. We could add that too.
Gateway signage.
We can.
I've heard compliments, Alan does too, we've heard compliments directly from business owners saying, I try to tell people where I'm at on Solano, but they get off at,
Richmond?
Yeah.
At the same time, just to remind you about the meeting we had with awesome Mark Hurley, they're doing a lot of reflective signage throughout town, I guess, that they have to meet some legal requirements and that kind of thing. So when they start doing that, apparently they'll start looking at the gateway signage.
Maybe.
Good.
I've been asking for that for at least 15 years.
There was some directional signage concepts developed a few years ago, and it got tied into a project that hasn't been implemented yet. I'm not sure exactly where that project ended up. But it used the city branding colors and fonts and that kind of thing.
Because right now we have a black and white old sign sitting in front of the subway that was out of business. for a
Subway's
while.
back open today.
I didn't, but, I mean, that sign is like on the side street, it's like one of those little.
Yeah.
Signs, and it's really sad.
So what, I wonder, does anybody know the stories about Subway or?
I didn't know it was open.
And so we saw that they were evicted
Oh.
for a while, and now all of a sudden they're back, so. But you guys
Maybe
have.
the franchise.
Are you gonna see it for owner?
Mm-hmm.
There was a police notice that they were evicted. Police department, so.
Are there any updates also on the plans of Golden Gate Fields to stay or go? Has that changed or been
Did-
updated? Maybe we could add that to the agenda, an update on that.
I'm sorry, what part of
Golden Gate Fields.
Just in general?
Just in general, I mean,
Yeah.
for as the last 20 years, I don't, maybe 50 years, I don't know. It seems like they're always sort of threatening to leave, and what will that look like? And you know, the latest I heard was as long as they're making money, they're not going anywhere. But I'd love to hear if that's still the case and sort of have a finger on the pulse there if things are going to change.
Yeah, I don't think there's any changes, but there is a, I think having it on the agenda would be fine. There is a little bit of news about an internal family dispute within the Stronach family. So that would be getting way off your agenda tonight, but there is some, they're not getting along, according to LA Times. You could Google LA Times and Frank Stronach and you'll see the article.
That's the article that Albany was rated #1.
Yeah, number one.
Exciting. It was, but the magazine, I hadn't heard of that magazine before. It was like a,
Modern.
Modern Albany.
You have to go pay to get these.
it was like a very sort of glitzy, it wasn't the SF, it wasn't the one that comes out every month, the big one. It was a different one.
Rated #1 in.
So, Bay Area cities to move to, yeah.
I have that somewhere.
Thank us for that, right? EDC.
They had like housing costs, schools, walkability, you know, near transit. They had about several different items and they crunched all the numbers and we were one.
Wow, we did all that. It's been a few good years for EDC, I'm telling you. Had our hand in everything.
Trying to find it here.
I stayed a little
No,
bit late.
Hotsy tagged it.
Oh, I have another meeting actually,
Thank you for your presentation.
double dipping.
We can, if there are any other comments, I think we can,
So who's our EDC liaison, the person that do we have somebody here that we hired for the?
Chris, yeah, we all kind of, it's a team approach. In terms of assisting businesses who are seeking to get permits, you can start with any one of us, but we've kind of designated Chris as the person who's keeping on top of it and kind of the budsman, so to speak. If they're having trouble with a permit or just don't understand the process, Chris Tan. But we're small, so you can contact any one of us and
Modern luxury.
we'll make sure that,
yeah, I'd never seen it before. It was very sort of upscale.
Just curious about trying to figure out how to get their signage approved for the outside, so they were a little confused about the process, we just ran into them last time.
okay. Is there someone we could talk to about that or is someone,
Well, no,
okay. Yeah.
They were also surprised that Ramona's being ripped up. They discovered today when a guy was going by with a beeper thing, but I told him it's gonna be really short.
I have another idea of a possible future agenda item. I know there's been a number of discussions about closing the access roads that lead from Albany to the El Cerrito Plaza, especially as part of the new condos that have just been built. I don't know if that's still happening, but potentially if those roads were closed off, it would have a economic impact on our city, I think.
Okay. we can report on that.
So San Pablo would be the main thoroughfare to get to.
If people are fed up and if it's too hard to go to Trader Joe's or Lucky's, they might go to Safeway in Albany or Sprouts. Maybe.
See, Trader Joe's could be a good thing to have near Target, like a small Trader Joe's. They don't.
They wouldn't do it so close, yeah.
Yeah.
I've run into like a zillion Targets out there. I wonder like if there's a pattern of things next to them, a complementary business type or something like that.
Best Buy, Michael's.
All right, well,
Okay,
Great.
thank you.
we're done.
Yep.
Are we adjourned?
Yeah,
Thank
we're
you.
adjourned.
General public for
Yes.
joining us. Don't touch that stuff in the corner or else I'll have to